a wide range of issues, but I want to talk to you about 5 key elements. First, we will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the largest increase in our province's history. Right now, 10% of workers in our province earn the minimum wage of $11.40. 30% earn less than $15 an hour. That's millions of people, many of them supporting a family on a wage that just doesn't go far enough. They're raising children. They're saving up for their education. They're wondering if they'll ever be able to get ahead on the monthly budget, let alone own a home. Increasing the minimum wage will make a world of difference in millions of lives. The increase will be phased in over the next 18 months. It'll rise to $14 this New Year's Day 2018 and to $15 on January 1st, 2019.
Hi everyone. As you can tell by the video of Premier Kathleen Wynne, today we will be discussing the impact of minimum wages. We will first be discussing the current minimum wage policies, followed by the effects of a minimum wage, and lastly, we will conclude this video with policy recommendations that we believe will help to minimize the associated negative impacts. As mentioned in the beginning of the video, there is a current policy in Ontario that will be introducing a minimum wage hike from $11.40 an hour to $15 an hour. This implementation will gradually be phased in over 2 parts, as we expect to see this policy in place at the beginning of January 1st, 2018, where minimum wages will increase to $14 an hour, and then to $15 an hour in January 1st, 2019. Premier Kathleen's objective is to ensure that low-income workers receive equal pay for equal work. This is also an opportunity that will assist in providing this workers group with more income in order to accommodate to the rising cost of living. However, based on conducted studies of economists, they believe that the positive effects of a minimum wage hike will not outweigh the associated negative effects. According to the economists at the Federal Reserve Board and the University of California, the majority of empirical research shows that a higher minimum wage reduces employment for the least skilled workers while having little to no effect on poverty rates. This is because when minimum wage is low relative to the median wage, which is the midpoint in the hourly wage where half of the workers earn above this point and half below, the resulting effects of jobs will be small. However, as the minimum wage increases relative to the median wage, it affects more and more workers and the negative economic effects become more severe. Currently, as of April 2017, Canada's median wage is $22.12 an hour. Therefore, with a sharp increase in the minimum wage of $15, the impact of job losses is expected to be significant. According to research conducted at the University of Washington, when Seattle had increased the minimum wage to $13 an hour, it resulted in employers substantially cutting back on low-paying jobs. Even though average pay went up for people at the bottom, there was less work, so they eventually became worse off overall. There are, however, benefits to implementing a minimum wage policy. By implementing a minimum wage or increasing minimum wages, we can expect an increase in consumption levels of those in lower income brackets, therefore stimulating the economy. Tax burdens will also be reduced since the need for public assistance will be lowered, and generally, minimum wage policies aid in decreasing income inequality. On the contrary, the negative effects of a minimum wage policy will result in an increase in prices of goods for everyone in order to subsidize the increase in costs of outputs. In addition, most businesses will try to reduce the number of workers to save on expenses. This will undoubtedly result in a decrease in employment level and makes it much more difficult for workers to find jobs. The result of this will have a substantial effect on those who are primarily low-skilled and young workers, since research and interviews have concluded the first ones to cut back on staff members are small business owners employing these worker groups. Lastly, with minimum wage policies or wage hikes, large businesses will have more incentives to offshore jobs for cheaper labor, or alternatively substitute labor for capital.
Now, to give you a better understanding of our topic, we've prepared 3 graphs. The primary model for evaluating the impact of minimum wage is the neoclassical supply and demand model. Economic theory predicts that a minimum wage in a competitive labor market will have an adverse employment effect, that is, employment will be reduced relative to what it would have been in the absence of the minimum wage. This is shown in the graph here where WC and NC are the equilibrium wage and level of employment. After the imposition of the minimum wage, WM, employers will reduce their demand for labor to the point NM. Therefore, NC minus NM is the adverse employment effect associated with the minimum wage. On top of that, NC minus NM workers should not be employed because of the minimum wage. An additional NS minus NC workers would be willing to work in this sector because the minimum wage is higher than the previous prevailing wage. Therefore, the queue of applicants for the reduced number of jobs is NS minus NM, with NC minus NM representing workers laid off because of the minimum wage, and NS minus NC representing new potential recruits who are attracted to the minimum wage jobs. But how do firms react to increasing minimum wage? Firstly, the wage increase shifts up the firm's marginal cost curves. In a perfectly competitive industry, each firm reduces output, which raises the market price of the product. In the new equilibrium, the output of each firm and total output are lower than the original equilibrium. The monopolist responds to the increase in cost by raising the product price and reducing output. The analysis of the intermediate market structures, such as monopolistic competition and oligopoly, is similar. In general, all things being equal, an increase in costs leads to an increase in the product price and a reduction in output. As we learned in class, both scale and substitution effects occur when wage increases. This graph tells us how the wage increase from W0 to W1 can be differentiated into two parts. The negative substitution effect occurs as the firm substitutes cheaper capital for the more expensive labor, therefore reducing the quantity of labor demanded. When labor is a normal input, the negative scale effect occurs as a wage increase leads to a higher marginal cost of production that in turn reduces the firm's optimal output and therefore drive demand for labor. Therefore, the scale and substitution effects reinforce each other to lead to an ambiguously inverse relationship between wages and the firm's demand for labor. The scale effect can be isolated by hypothetically forcing the firm to continue producing Q0. This is illustrated by the hypothetical isocost line that is parallel to the new isocost, which is W1 over R0, but tangent to the original isoquant Q0 at ES. The only difference between ES and E1 is the scale of operation of the firm, since the relative price of labor and capital are the same. That is, both are W1 over R0. Therefore, NS to N1 can be thought of as a scale effect, the reduction in employment that comes about to the extent that the firm reduces its output in response to the wage increase. In general, an increase in the wage may cause the firm to employ more or less capital.
We are now going to move on to potential recommendations. The first recommendation we have is the implementation of a sub-minimum wage. Defined by the U.S. government, a sub-minimum wage refers to a wage paid less than it was actually given as minimum wage. The Fair Labor Standards Act provides that sub-minimum wages to be paid to 1. Student learners, 2. Full-time students employed by retail or service establishments, agriculture, or institutions of higher education, and 3. Physically and mentally disabled persons whose productive capacity is being impaired. Now, sub-minimum wage will help reduce the effects of the sudden wage hike. This will allow small businesses operating in the retail and food industry to employ low-skilled jobs at a wage more in line, while jobs that require higher skill levels to be paid the required minimum at the least. This will allow the group of people who would be unemployed with the wage hike a chance to be employed, and this is the second recommendation we have is to reward the Canadian companies that hire all local Canadian workers with some sort of publicity. The government can do this in two ways. The first way is sending out a PSA letting consumers know that it is beneficial to the economy if you support a business that hires all local or domestic employees. The second way is having a special club or group of businesses in which the requirement to get in is having all local or domestic employees, in which the government will then support and advertise the group so consumers know exactly what businesses are hiring all domestic employees. The hopes of this program is so that more companies will actually hire Canadian workers and reduce outsourcing. Overall, the hope of this program is to let consumers be aware which companies are hiring local employees and to support them so they don't look to outsourcing the work to other countries.